Hello, and welcome to this episode of the podcast for the Eastbourne Literary Festival, the festival whose mission is to convince you that you are a writer. I'm Russ Miles, a local writer, listener, and festival instigator, and in this podcast, I'll be chatting to many diverse and interesting writers about how they write to inspire you to pick up your pen, your keyboard, or even a phone to start writing. Today we have L.M. Chilton, best-selling debut author of Don't Swipe Right. And as of the 13th of March, 2025, everyone in the group chat dies. I think it's fair to say I've never been quite so excited for a podcast interview of someone who's quite so obsessed with serial killers, but this is going to be fun, I suspect. Luke has been a journalist for 15 years, working for TV shows like This Morning, The One Show, and Loose Women, as well as magazines and newspapers such as The Times, The Mirror, Metro, New, Cosmopolitan, and even Glamour. Luke, welcome to the show.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure, my friend, absolute pleasure. So I mean that word pleasure as most intensely I've actually said for a long time, because I've actually spent the last 2 days very much listening to your first book, your debut book, which is Don't Swipe Right. And that story, and I should warn you right now, I'm just at a crux. I think I'm beginning to get a view of who the killer may be. It's beautifully done, but I'm not looking for any spoilers from any of your books, because please do be careful. But I do have to ask you a question about that novel. Seeing as we have our literary festival in the making in Eastbourne, why set your debut novel in Eastbourne?
Well, number one, it's a fabulous place. I love Eastbourne. I think it needed a bit more of a spotlight. I think it deserved a bit more of a spotlight. I know Eastbourne a little bit. I live in London, but it's obviously not too far from London. And I'm quite love English, British seaside towns, which I think Eastbourne's a really lovely example of. The great big old Victorian hotels on the seafront, the pier. So I thought that would be a good place to set a book. I actually used to do, and still sometimes do, the Eastbourne triathlon, just the mini version. I'm not in good enough health to do the full triathlon. But I used to go down and do that with my brother every summer, did it last summer. And one summer, I've told this story before, but one summer I was doing the triathlon, and the first thing you do is get in the wetsuit and jump in the sea. That's the first bit. And it was the first year they'd done it after the pandemic, and there'd been all the lockdowns, and it was boiling hot heat wave. And I had put on a little bit of extra lockdown pounds, and I didn't quite fit in my wetsuit. I jumped in the sea, and straight away my wetsuit zip broke open at the back, and water, cold water, poured in, and I actually had to be rescued by the chap on a little canoe. But for a few seconds there, I did think this was how I was going to go. But I was looking back at the beautiful cityscape of Eastbourne, or townscape, and a beautiful sunny day. And I thought, well, if this is the last thing I ever see, that's not such a bad sight. So I wonder if then, because I was writing my novel at that time, if that played into my inspiration of Eastbourne, or my kind of love for Eastbourne. But I did survive, and I did complete the mini triathlon. And I've been back to do it ever since. So I love going to Eastbourne in the summer. Got friends in Eastbourne. But I also think there is this sort of faded glamour around British seaside towns. And they're not as popular as they were in the 70s. And people are off to Spain now on a cheap plane ticket. And I especially thought out of season is an interesting time. And you do see this on British TV, crime dramas quite a lot, I think, of seaside towns, because there is something a bit gritty and a bit dark and a bit sleazy, out of season, when all the tourists aren't there, what goes on. So that was my inspiration. And I wanted it to be British. I'm British. I wanted to write a British book, and I wanted to write about British people, and I wanted to do something where the lead character was sort of a bit stuck. And I thought this would be a good place for a person to be stuck, who's kind of getting near to 30, thinking, what am I going to do with my life? And I'm stuck in Eastbourne, which might not be the place that a 30-year-old would want to be stuck, running a coffee shop on the seafront.
I loved all of that, to be honest. It chimed with almost everyone I know. And as I was explaining it to members of my family, and they were going, well, how have I missed this book? Because it speaks to me. And in fact, the person who brought it up with me the strongest was my sister.
Mhm.
And she had a question, if you don't mind, she had a question for you, which
Please.
is how do you write female protagonists quite so well? Because it is the language she would use. It is the thought processes she probably used many times in her life when she was, I think it's fair to say, a little younger than she is now. But that you do write a female protagonist so well from authorities that have told me. I guess two questions. Why? Because I would imagine it's more challenging, but maybe I'm wrong. And then, as well as why, do you have any hints, tips, techniques? How do you do it? How do you get in the head of these female protagonists that seem so real?
Well, number one, I'd say it wasn't a decision I took lightly to do it, and I've had it's really nice feedback from your sister, by the way. So say thank you to her for saying that. And I've had other people say that, other women say that, and I've had a few women say, "Oh, we don't really like a man writing in a woman's voice. They're telling our stories for us." So totally take that on board. And the reason I decided to do it with this book was because I wanted it to be about dating apps, and I wanted the killer, the serial killer in the book is going around killing all the protagonist dates. Everyone she dates dies. And I started writing it with a male protagonist because I think, you're a debut novelist, you tend to write what you know, and I was going on lots of online dates. But it quickly became apparent that that would mean the victims are all female. And I did think, what, we don't need another crime book where all the victims, and there's five victims, I think, in this book, to be women. And it's a kind of, it's not an out and out comedic book, but it's definitely got comedic elements. There's sort of dark humor in there. And I just didn't think that was very funny in 2023 when it came out. I thought, and as soon as I switched that and made the protagonist female and the victims male, then you can really start having a little go at the male and all the toxic men. And you'll know from listening to it that the men are really toxic and the dates she goes on are really toxic. I've been on lots of dates with women and you just don't really get toxic women like that. So it really made it fun. You were able to have the bad guys and able to see them get killed in gruesome, horrible, and inventive ways. So that's why I did it. And I think as soon as I made that switch, suddenly it was a lot easier to write and a lot more fun to write. And in terms of writing from a female perspective, I mean, I think we're all humans. We're all, I don't think there's any like special women are super different and men are super different. We all have the same fears and hopes and dreams and things like that. I think I spent a lot of time, as you said at the top, working as a journalist, and I used to work for women's magazines, which meant I've interviewed a lot of women about their stories, and it was all these supermarket magazines like Take a Break and That's Life, where crazy things had happened to them, car crashes, weight loss, babies, the sort of stories that are really dramatic. So I would spend hours on the phone or in person interviewing them about their lives, and then you'd write the story in first person. So you'd write it from their point of view. So perhaps that helped me out. I don't want to say like I've got some magic ability to write as a woman thinks. I would never say that, but maybe the years I spent interviewing women about their stories and sort of putting it into their words maybe helped with that. But it's really nice to hear that feedback. And yeah, I hope I hope when women read it, they do think, oh, that sounds like us. And I'll tell you, the publisher, I go under the name LM Chilton, and one of the reasons for that is the publisher felt that that might be a better way to not immediately say a man is writing this. So sometimes people read the book or listen to the book and they get to the end and they Google it or they see my photo and they realize, oh, it was a man. And they're often surprised. They're often like, I get a lot of comments, oh, a man wrote this. How did he do that? So that's good. I'm glad. So say thank you to your sister, basically.
I will too, and it's got to be considered one of the greatest compliments, really, to be
Yeah.
able to write and to write with humor. Have you always written with that sort of style? I'm trying to think. There's a few other authors out there that it just reminded me slightly of. At times, I got a little Anthony Bourdain sort of, a little bit of a sideways look at life that very much was embodied in the character you were working with, but. Is that how you write? Is that just natural to you? Or again, is that something you have to work hard to inject?
Well, I don't think I'm that funny in real life. I like talking, but I do think I can write quite funny jokes. Like I can, if I sit and think of a joke, I could write it. So I'm not very quick-witted, but like many writers, if you give us an hour to sit down, we'll come up with something good. Um, but I think again, when I was writing it, I wanted it to be fun. I wanted to have fun writing it, and it made me laugh. And I decided quite early on that the lead character, she's called Gwen, and I decided early on that Gwen, her superpower, if you like, would be her humor. And one of the tips you're often given as a writer is give your lead protagonist a superpower, something they're good at. Doesn't have to be, flying or X-ray vision, but something that they are really good at and is sort of their special skill that makes them a bit different and why you're telling their story. So I decided her superpower would be her humor. That enabled me to give her lots of sort of silly jokes and cheesy jokes and making jokes all the time, but also she uses that to get out of situations and to charm people or to distract people or even to distract herself. It's, a coping mechanism, self-defense mechanism. So it suddenly opened up. I didn't want it to just be this is a comedy book and it's got lots of jokes, and I wanted the humor to be part of the story, and it's something that she uses as part of her personality. And once I sort of had that click, again, it just made it fun to write. She's a really fun character to write. So I think hopefully that's what comes off the page, is that she's sort of, I mean, a lot of people find her a bit annoying, Russ. If I'm honest. They like reading her adventures, but they find the way she sort of gets into trouble and her impulsive decisions a little bit questionable. But I think that makes her quite a fun character to read about.
It did a couple of moments in there where you have that screaming that you would normally do in a bit of a horror movie where you're like, no, don't split up. Don't split up now. And you're like, actually, that is in some respects what people do. They do lose that. We always assume that people are rational in those moments. So it makes it more real when people do things that do end up screaming at the TV because you're rationally sitting there at home enjoying the audiobook or the book or the TV. But of course, they're supposed to be in a moment where rationality has been
Yes.
slightly set aside.
And it would be very boring if they just sat in their chair or got back into bed and said, "Oh, I'm not going to go on this adventure today." Sorry, that wouldn't be a very exciting book. So,
That
yeah.
reminds me so much of some of the storytelling work I've been doing recently in different workshops and things that we're preparing for the festival. And there is this thing of, well, every character goes on a journey that starts with them getting out of bed and going off on something. And I think all storytelling would cease if the answer was, actually, I won't. I'll just go back to bed today.
Yeah, yeah. Well, page one, chapter one, the end.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Fantastic. So being an Eastbourner, being a local,
Mhm.
and I'm sure people like our local MP, Josh Barber-Inde, would want me to ask you this question as well. There are a few moments, not many, and there's
Yeah,
much
Chris.
in the book, by the way, that doesn't just chime, it chimes strongly in our lived experience of Eastbourne. The book begins in Cameo, and some of the sort of sideways glances at the beauty of Eastbourne nightclubs does chime true. There's also a couple of moments in there where the description doesn't match completely reality that you see in Eastbourne. I think my favourite example of that was, I think you referred to the Hampden Park Mall. Also, I think you talk about a stairwell in the bowling alley, and it's one of the few bowling alleys that has no second floor. And there's moments like that, which it could be as simple as, do you know what, I haven't gone and frequented these places that much, which is a perfectly legitimate answer for fiction, I believe. But at the same time, in the language you use, I can also see another reason for presenting things that way. It could be a simplification. It could be also something that's more communicable to a broader audience internationally, even with those sort of slightly simplistic view of some of these places. Was that the sort of thing that was on your mind when you were writing those scenes?
Well, firstly, let me apologise to the people of Eastbourne for any inaccuracies. I've got a friend who lives in Pevensey Bay, up the road from, and she was very annoyed that some of the bus routes I'd got. She said, "Well, Gwen wouldn't have been able to take a bus from that place to that place. There's no route." So, yes, there are some inaccuracies. I think for things like the bowling alley, yeah, I needed for the story the Gwen and her date to escape through a fire escape and go down the stairs, go down an escalator. So that's, what you put in for the story. Things like cameos, I have been to and I've gone to see. Um, Things like there's a crazy golf. There is a crazy golf in Eastbourne, but it's not a jungle. One doesn't have big plastic crocodiles and gorillas and things like that. So some of these things are massaged for the story. You're right. And I don't live in Eastbourne. I go there once or twice a year. So some of it I was looking on Google Maps and working out the route she would take in a coffee van and how she would get to different places. But I think I could have done a fictitious place. And actually, in my second book, everyone in the group chat dies. It's a fictitious village, and I was able to make it all up. And that presents different problems because it's like, great, I can make up anything I want, but you don't have anything to base it on. You don't have any fuel. You've got to all come from your imagination. So I did use Eastbourne as a basis for the book, and that gave me a lovely structure of the seafront and different places she could go. But yes, I do think if you're an Eastbourne native, you might spot a little. Feel free to. I'm not on Twitter anymore, but if you find me on social media, you can feel free to tweet me with any issues, and I will apologise.
You may regret that offer, my friend. So there's a couple of things you've mentioned about the character Gwen and the book generally. I've got a couple of questions that come to mind. The first one is about Gwen. So she is, for me at least, not an annoying character. She's extremely lovable. In my head, she's possibly very different than perhaps she was in yours when you were writing her. And that, I think that's one of the beautiful things about how you've written Gwen, is she is a deep character. But she's deep with sort of minimal level actual description of her. So you leave a lot of good room to interpret who she could be and the way she is with everybody else. Even though she is your protagonist, so there's a lot that you look to share about her at different times. When you had to say goodbye to her at the end of the book, when the story was over, did you have any emotions and an attachment to your character at that point? Because obviously she's not in any other books you've written. This is a whole nother scenario and setup for the other book. It's not like you're planning a 5-book series of the Gwen epilogues. So what's did you have any of those emotions with it, or was it just relief that the book was done at that point?
No, actually, you're spot on. I did. I think she's a really strong character, and I think I mentioned before about debut authors using a lot of their own personalities. So I don't think I'm like Gwen outwardly, but there probably is a lot of me in Gwen, and maybe internally, or maybe that's how I'd quite like to be, or I'm not quite as extroverted, but that's how I'd like to be. So I think it's, there's probably things I don't even see about myself that are in here because I think every debut author is going to pour a lot of themselves into their debut protagonist. So yeah, I guess in a sort of pretentious way, she's always with me, Russ. She's never left me. But I do think for such a strong and fun character to write, definitely at the end was hard to leave behind. And I think since writing second book and I'm currently writing my third book, to come up with a different character, it was the first kind of impulse was like, oh, I'll just write the same character again. You're like, well, I can't do that, but you kind of like, oh, but it's so familiar and so easy. It was very fun to be in her shoes, and I spent a lot of time in her shoes, a lot of time writing it. So it was hard to say goodbye to her, and it is hard to leave that character behind and come up from scratch a totally new and different character. But she may well return one day. I wouldn't be adverse to a sequel and bringing her back, maybe a little bit older and a little bit wiser, because you don't want to have the same impulsive, immature person. You want them to have learned something from their initial adventures, running around Eastbourne and chasing serial killers. So yeah, maybe there might be another story for Gwen in the future.
I can see a sort of rather trendy Miss Marple kind of figure where she's becoming a
Millennial
sleuth.
Miss Marple, yeah.
And one of the themes of this podcast has emerged to be how much authors, I want to say discard, and that's definitely not throw away. It's pieces that didn't quite make it or scenes that were not quite so great. And different episodes, we've had different amounts of words that have been cut and culled in the process. When it came to your debut novel, when it came to Don't Swipe Right, and then also when it comes to Everyone in the Group Chat Dies, do you find that there was a lot that was discarded in both of those novels? And has it changed between the two novels, the amount you tend to discard? Or is it a bit like Holly said and shared in the previous podcast that, it's all messy, you never quite know what's going to be cut or added next?
Yeah, I'm a big rewriter. So I think, or redrafting, repolishing. So a lot of my stuff isn't complete deletions or deleting like 70,000 words or big chunks of words. It's more rewriting and massaging those words into like a lump of clay and building it up into a nice pot. Having said that, so I think for my first book, it was more like that, and there weren't so many wasted words. For the second one, for everyone in the group chat dies, I think if you added up every word I wrote, it's probably 200 odd thousand words, and that's an 80,000 word book. So I think that one went through a lot of different changes, and I changed my mind a lot about how I wanted it to be and the story I wanted to tell. So it did change, and I think well, I think what's interesting is, and I think Holly said this as well, nothing is wasted. Every word you write is a good word. So even if you write a word and delete it, you're getting a better writer. You're becoming a better writer with every sentence you write. I do really believe that. A friend of mine, an author actually called Rosie Mullender, has a document called Darlings, because you say kill your darlings. So she puts all the words she deletes, she cut and pastes them into a document called Darlings and keeps them because they'll always come in handy. Book 5, you might think, oh, I really need a little turn of phrase. You go to your Darlings folder, and there it is, hopefully. I have the same thing. I do the same thing. I cut and paste and I plonk it in this Darlings folder. And that also, you can relax. You're like, oh, I haven't really deleted it. It's still there. It's still there for use at a later date. So that allows you the free, because every writer will know when you're looking at your word count, and we all do it, and it's 35,000 words. The last thing you want to see that is the drop, like the 28,000 words. You're like, oh my goodness, I've got another mountain to climb. So I would recommend to any writer, just have another folder, cut and paste and plonk it, and you will use it. I tried to write a novel when I was about 22, and I still use little sentences and words from that in Don't Swipe Right. I was plundering that. I went back and had a look, and oh, that was quite a nice little turn of phrase. Nothing is wasted. Every sentence you write makes you a better writer.
I love that as well. And I think there's different writers use different phrases for these
Yeah.
bits and pieces. And the one that I loved the most actually was, I think a writer called it their compost heap once. And so there's this compost heap that's constantly being added to of things, pieces and ideas and even whole characters that might actually be used. And I found that a fascinating way of sort of collating the stuff that just didn't quite make it. With the Darlings document in mind, when you're working through your second book in particular, did you find that you had or developed a community of people that could help you, that could advise you, that could be with you on that journey? Again, this is something that Holly mentioned. She's got a few people she can run ideas past. And that, because of the fragility of ideas, she's very careful about who receives them and who gives her feedback, because they could absolutely be killed very quickly. So, and she said they could be really good ideas and they could still be absolutely killed by the wrong turn of phrase. Do you have anyone like that you use even for the early stages of ideas?
Yes. Well, I've got my partner, my girlfriend, Daniele, who I live with, and she's very good. She's very smart, and she's very good to bounce ideas off. And I do have a little group of friends who like beta readers who I'll give it to. I will say with this second book, I was more cagey about it. And I think I did keep it close to my chest, which was detrimental, I think. I think tell people your ideas, let them know. And, no one's going to steal your ideas. No one's going to, they're only going to want to try and help you. And I think the more you talk about an idea and the more you sort of bounce it off people, the better it will get. And I think I was a little bit with my second book cagey about it because I wasn't sure at first. I mentioned I changed my mind. So I think initially I was like, oh, this is a good idea. And I think had I talked to more people about it and shared it a bit more, I think it would have either given me the confidence to go with it, or they said, oh, actually, it doesn't really work. So I do have a little group of friends, really useful. And for this one I'm writing at the moment, I'm going to try and learn from that mistake and be bombarding them with chapters and all that stuff, so I could get as much feedback as possible. What's harmful about feedback is as long as it's coming from a good place and it's your mates, so they're not gonna say this is a load of rubbish. And maybe if they do, that's helpful too. Maybe good to be honest.
We've all got that one friend who, whatever they say, you do the complete opposite.
Yeah, well, that's handy too.
Exactly. So you say that you sort of switched that relationship with who you share things to as you went to the second book. We talked a little bit in other episodes about the way that you change as a writer, particularly with success. Now, I know you've had many, many years of contributing your writing to many, many different formats and mediums and everything that goes into it. But at the same time, this is if you like, your baby. And your first baby out there as a novel you've created has gone and been wonderfully successful. Did that change how you felt about writing and approaching your writing at all? Or was it water off a duck's back and no problem whatsoever?
It's not water off a duck's back at all. It does. I think like every writer on their second book will suffer from their second album syndrome, if you like. And whatever the level of success you have with the first one, if your second one is then your day job, it becomes a totally different kettle of fish. It's not something you're doing as a hobby. It's not something you're kind of hurriedly doing in your commute. It's something you're spending hours on and something you're under contract to deliver. And it does change psychologically the way you think about it. And I think that's why I had a bit of a stumble with the second one until I kind of got over that fear of like, you have to do it for yourself, basically. And you have to sort of forget that somebody's waiting for this. And this time you've got a deadline. And this time some publisher or editor is going to read it and be critical about it. You've got to put all that out of your mind. And that's easier said than done. But I did manage to do that, and I think the way you do that is you think, what do I like writing about? What do I want to? You have to sort of forget about anyone else and say, I'm doing this for me. And yeah, that's not always easy, but I managed to do it. Well, you'll have to if you finish Don't Swipe Right, Ross, you'll have to listen or read to everyone in the group chat diet and let me know if you like it.
It's already there on my to read list, along with many, many others she's put out, but it will be up near the top because I'm sad to hear that it's not set in Eastbourne, but I can live with it. I can move on. At least you haven't said it in some place that might be weirdly competitive with Eastbourne. That would hurt more.
Well, it's very different, actually. As I say, it's a fictional town, but it's sort of based on where I grew up. And I grew up in a little village, a little leafy sort of suburban village, a commuter village to London, where equally, like, you might think this is quite a boring place, but is a bit sleazy and a bit, I think people maybe abroad think lovely English countryside villages with their leaves and their quaint pubs and stuff. But as Brits, we know it's often not the case. And often it's lots of boarded up high streets and casual drug use and that sort of stuff. So I wanted to kind of shine a light on that sort of English town this time. And there's a serial killer there as well to boot.
Fantastic. And which actually is a consistent theme. Now, I want to talk about how you came to writing in the first place. But before we go there, serial killers. Do you worry about yourself?
Well, I tell you what, I love slasher movies like Scream. And I Know What You Did Last Summer, Halloween, those sort of movies. And they do have a heightened reality where, you're watching it for fun. You kind of want to see the screaming and the running and the stabbing. So I'm not a huge fan of kind of true crime and real serial killers. And I don't read lots of books about Jack the Ripper and things like that. I'm sort of interested in that slightly heightened reality where it's a bit more fun, if that's a weird word. So no, hopefully I don't worry about myself. And also you'll see in my books, I don't spend ages. They're not like Stephen King. They're not going to be gruesome horror. You're not going to see or read about really graphic details of murders and stuff. It's very much more. People say sometimes call my books cozy, and they're not quite cozy because they're sort of cozy, but not cozy, if that makes any sense.
Cozy serial killer.
Yeah, yeah. You'll have to read them to find out. But they're certainly not. If you're squeamish, you'll enjoy them. As somebody described Don't Swipe Right as Bridget Jones meets Scream. If Bridget Jones was in a Scream movie, so I like to think that they're that sort of level of fun and not too gruesome.
Fantastic, brilliant. So yes, let's talk about writing generally because you've had a substantial career as a writer and a contributor to many different things. How did you get started? What was your path? And do you subscribe to that thing of I had to write? I had no choice in it. It was what I do. Or do you have a different story that led you into being a writer?
Well, it's interesting in hindsight, isn't it? When you look back at your childhood and you think, well, actually, I was writing quite a lot. And I used to write my own, I used to love the fighting fantasy books, the kind of choose your own adventure books. And I used to write my own choose your own adventure books. My father worked in the computing industry. He used to bring back these reams of computer paper, the old printer paper that would print out. And I would write these huge choose your adventure, which no one ever read. Maybe my mum read them, but no one ever read them. So it's interesting to look back. I obviously always was interested in writing, and my mum was an English teacher, so she used to read to me, and my dad used to read to me every night. And there were always books around the house, a lot of books. So I think that was always instilled in me, and I was always good at writing and good at English at school. So I think I was naturally drawn to journalism, and I went and studied journalism. And what I found was in journalism, I wasn't very good at hard news. We were talking about earlier, I'm not that into true crime. I think I'm not that in. I found real life a bit too realistic, perhaps. So I wasn't a very good news journalist. Um, but I was quite good at this sort of human interest journalism, and talking to people and hearing their stories and writing that. And I think every journalist is a frustrated novelist at heart, and I think every journalist probably wants to write a novel. So it took me a bit too long to get round to it, and I think probably took the pandemic and having that time of what am I going to do with all this time to actually sit down and do it. So that's what, yeah, I think in answer to your question, I have always loved writing. I've always enjoyed writing. I've always felt that's how I can express myself best.
Did anyone ever encourage you? Were there voices that you remember? Sometimes there's this voice of encouragement that says, "You're good at this. Roll with this." Or perhaps the opposite. And you thought, "No, I am good at this."
Well, that's a good question. Like, I definitely think my parents were always really encouraging of that, and my girlfriend's really encouraging that now. But I do think, I mean, I don't want to keep talking about the pandemic. I hate talking about the pandemic, but because I was writing this novel in one of the lockdowns, and I was on my own at that time, and I was completely alone. And I think perhaps writing provided a bit of companionship to me at that time, and it made me feel good. And I definitely think that when you're doing something well and you know it's good and you get that buzz, I got that dopamine hit. And I don't really get that from anything else. That when I've written a good chapter or a good character, I get a buzz that I don't find anywhere else. And I do think I should also say, as I said, I gave it to lots of my friends to read, and their feedback was always really encouraging as well. So uh, I would, I do think it comes from within initially, but then the feedback and support of your peers and your friends and your partners really kind of solidifies that you think, oh, actually, because I'm not that secure. It is always good to get somebody say this is good, keep going. And then I guess the ultimate validation is getting your agent, getting your publishing deal, getting it, seeing it on the shelves, and then you think, oh, actually, so some other people like this.
Can you share anything about that journey of getting an agent? You mentioned a lot of your writing was during lockdown, which had a mixed opportunity for many people, right?
Mhm.
But you've then achieved finding a agent and a way of bringing this book to an enormous audience. You can see that from the 800 plus reviews on Amazon. You are a gregarious and wonderful human being, but I'm guessing you don't have 800 friends that are writing these reviews. So that must be a wonderful result. But was it difficult? Obviously, please don't betray any trusts here or lose an agent. But was it difficult to find the right agent?
I've got the typical story of just rejection after rejection after rejection, and I think that's part of the course. I've never really heard of any author, getting an agent straight away, or the first agent they email says yes, please. So there was I had a spreadsheet like many authors, and I would tick it off when I sent it, when they rejected me. And it was getting to the point there was 50 or 60 rejections there on my spreadsheet. And I thought, I'm running out of agents to submit to. So it was right at the end, and it was one of the last ones. And I'm with an agency called Watson Little, a wonderful agency, and they got me a great deal at Head of Zeus, who are a lovely publisher, imprint of Bloomsbury. But it wasn't easy, and I don't think it's ever going to be easy. And that's just the industry. It's not a reflection on how good a writer you are. Don't take it personally, I'd say to anyone submitting. Keep trying, don't give up. Obviously improve your work. If they're kind enough to send you feedback, take that in, listen to what people are saying. But the most important thing is don't take it personally. I don't want this to sound arrogant, but I was really pleased with my book, Don't Swipe Right. I thought it was a brilliant idea. I thought, dating app serial killer, everyone she dates dies. I thought it was a really good hook, a really good premise. I thought the character was funny. I thought it was a good story. I think it's a good twist. I won't reveal to you, Russ, who done it, but I think it's a classic who done it. So I was confident that I had something good, and so that kept me going. But it is soul destroying getting that email, and sometimes I'd get 2 rejections a day in your inbox. And you're going to work, you're having a normal day, and you're just getting somebody saying this is something you spent 18 months writing. No, with a single line, a form rejection, not for us. And you think, really, not for you? And every writer will recognize this, but you'll have read books that have been published. And you go, this, my book's better than that book. How come that? And you'll go through all these emotions. And it's easy to say, afterwards, after you've come out the other side, but keep going.
I think it's great advice. Believe in what you've written, because what's coming across there is just how much you believed in your book, in your story, that you could traverse a spreadsheet of rejections.
If no one had wanted to publish it, I would have published it myself. But if I could have afforded to, I would have done that, because I think I was really proud of it, and I wanted the opportunity for other people to read it.
Now, I've got a question you may not be able to answer, because it can be a little commercially sensitive at times. But has the story been optioned? Are we waiting for a TV series of this? I can see a really good Netflix series, and let's be honest, they have cash.
You know what? As you read in your introduction, I've worked in television, so I think I've got quite a visual mind, and I did write this. I didn't write it, trying to make it into a TV series. I wasn't that cynical about it, but I think I write quite visually, and and there's lots of scenes there that when I was writing it, I thought this would look good on TV. So in answer to your question, yes, it has been optioned, and it's being worked on. It hasn't not been greenlit yet, so I can't give any exclusives. But to listeners from Eastbourne, I will give you the exclusive. It's not going to be set in Eastbourne. And I'm sorry to let you, which I'm a bit sad about, which isn't any reflection on Eastbourne. It's just that the company who are making it want to spotlight another area of the UK. So yes, fingers crossed, Russ, we will see something on TV. I'm waiting for that email every day at the moment. That's going to could be another rejection, or it could be the green light. But there's some scripts written, which I haven't read, which is crazy as a writer when you think, oh, somebody's adapted it, and I really want to know what they've done. But you have to let go, and I'm very happy to let go and let this wonderful writer get her teeth into it and see what she does with it.
That reminds me of a fantastic book that I read last week. It's about the death of the author, I think is the name of it. It's a science fiction book, and in that, it's a wonderful multi-layered tale. But part of that is when the book that the author in the book, that's how multi-layered it gets, has actually had her story optioned, and it's gone to a movie, and the movie's been very successful. And it hurts her deeply, because it's not set where she was writing her book. It didn't pick up any of the nuances of what she poured her heart into in her book. And I wonder if I hope there's no sense of that when things come to culminations. I'm sure they will.
Well, you'll have to have it back on the podcast, right?
I will.
I'll be watching through my hands, I think. But amazing. If that happens, it'll be amazing. So I have no complaints whatsoever. They could do whatever they like.
I'm thinking of Luke Chilton live streaming on Twitch,
watching the first
of the first time you see it.
Well, also, as I said, there's a lot of me in the character of Gwen. So whoever ends up playing her, that's going to be very strange to see somebody, echoing, using some of my lines and things that I've said in real life that I then put in the book. So it's going to be quite surreal, but in a good way.
I don't see how it can ever be ultimately bad, but I can imagine the journey could be an interesting one. So when it comes to reading, if we can just turn to that, that's something that, again, is another one of those little themes that's emerging across the podcast. Do you find much time to read as a professional writer? And what do you read? And do you have a highly controlled approach to reading? Or do you do more like I think David Hendy talked about, which is read widely and almost randomly, anything just to see what might inform and refresh your writing mind?
Well, I heard that advice, and it's brilliant advice. I don't always do it, but I think reading widely and randomly is great. I tend to read, at the moment, quite a lot of thriller books, in my genre. And that's a genre I love to read. That's why I wrote a thriller, as I liked writing thrillers. And obviously, the more you're in that world, the more you hear about other authors and their books. I do think it is hard to read. I'm at the moment, I'm writing my third book, and I'm sort of doing that pretty much full time. And, you're writing all day and sort of you might think the last thing you want to do in the evening is pick up a book and read more words. But it is inspirational. And if you are feeling a bit uninspired or a bit of writer's block, I think one of the best things you can do is to read a book. And it does, you find yourself taking on a bit of that tone, you find yourself taking on a bit of that language. So I think it's quite good if you're thinking, the other day I was writing and I wanted to write sort of fast-paced action, funny stuff, and I got an old Ben Elton book out, Popcorn, and I was reading Popcorn, and it's a really fun, easy read because I wanted to sort of get my head into that sort of zone, the way he writes short, punchy, funny sentences. So it is a bit of a hack. It's a good hack for any writer, and as you've heard on your podcast, every author will say read loads. But I would say if you're an author or you're writing your first book, don't be too hard on yourself because it is hard to read and write a novel at the same time. But my advice would be, yeah, definitely read in your genre and see what other books are successful in your genre. I went out when I was writing Don't Swipe Right and, read all the top 10 thriller books and saw what was out there and what was doing well and what readers liked. And I found that really inspirational. But I totally think, yeah, like one of my favorite books is 100 Years of Solitude, and I pick that up every year. That's complete. I could never write a book like that, or I'd love to write a book like that, but I don't have that. That's a million miles from what I write, but uh, I would definitely find that inspirational as well. So I wish I did read more. I should definitely get off my mobile phone, and some of the time I spend scrolling through social media could definitely be spent reading because it is the number one tip you'll hear from any author is read more. I use social media. That's my excuse. I've got to be on social media because my books are all about apps and digital, and it's the modern world. So that I've got a good excuse.
Like we all need an excuse to use these dopamine injecting addiction machines. Okay, so I've got two last questions. You've heard the podcast before, so you know that at least one of them's coming. But the first question is a relatively new one, and I don't think it's featured on the podcast yet. It's in some of the edits we're working on. But it's this question of, what's the question you wish, now that you've had certainly your first book out for quite some time, second book's out since last Thursday. In that time, has there been a question that you wish you'd been asked about your writing or your books? So what's that burning question you go, I wish they'd go there. They never seem to go there with me.
It's a good question. Certainly the one I get asked a lot and I never know how to answer it is, who would you have play Gwen in a movie or TV series? What actor should play Gwen? And I never know what to say to that one. So I'm glad that didn't come up. But I suppose if I'm being quite pretentious, I think every writer really likes to be asked about their inner themes. And you brought it up actually, Russ, because you talk about Gwen being quite a deep character. I think a lot of people talk about Gwen and say, yeah, she's a bit annoying, she's impulsive, she's a bit crazy, she's funny. But there's a deeper side to her as well. And that's sort of touched on in the book, and it's done a bit more subtly. And I didn't want to, put a lot of that in the foreground. There's backgrounds going stuff about her father and her friendship. And I think it's going to sound a bit arrogant because I think it'd be lovely to just talk for hours about all the themes that I'd shoved into Don't Swipe Right. And you'll see if you read Everyone in the Group Chat Dies, that's all about social media and news and fake news and who can you trust in the media and how a lot of our news is coming from social media these days and how do we know if we can trust it. There's lots of those sort of themes in there. So yeah, my slightly pretentious answer is I want to be asked about all the deep themes and metaphors in my books, because I think I'd say you might see my books on the shelf, think that's a fun kind of popcorn thriller, and they definitely are. And I think sometimes people think, oh, that's all they are. So if anyone wants to delve into the deeper themes, that would be great.
It may be for another podcast episode,
yeah.
but I do love, and maybe if we can arrange it, perhaps you could come down to the festival next year and do a session on themes.
I'd love that.
We'll make sure we trick everyone into the room, lock the doors. But I hear you on that, because again, I got that from Don't Swipe Right. It is funny. There's all this surface level slickness, I would say, to your writing style. It's so easy to traverse. It's the sort of book that, in my case, I can listen to when I'm walking my dog Sophie around the block. and it just sits well with you. You don't have to work hard to take on what you're trying to bring, and also I think there's an argument that says that you write in such a way that you bring the scenes to life well enough that I don't have to think about it much, which is important. Because when someone does a really big scene building and you sit there and go, right, I've got to remember what they said at the beginning, because otherwise I'm losing the picture. You don't have any of that, and that's fantastic. But as you say, you go very deeply into themes. And, I myself have been doing online dating back in the day. It never worked well for me. But there were so many moments in the desperation of that experience that you touch on. You don't belabor. You speak to the sort of scar tissue in Gwen of that, yes, I've had 7 dates in the last 2 weeks. It does sound bad, but it's not. It's the way it works.
Yeah, that's life.
Right. So the last question for you, my friend, if I may, which is, what would have been the thing that you would have wanted to hear before you began your writing life? I don't know how far back we have to go to be at this moment, but if there was one thing you could have said to you back then that would have been helpful through your career, your long career in writing for TV shows and magazines, newspapers, as a journalist, and now as a novelist, what would you say to yourself back then?
Well, I don't want to mess up the space-time continuum too much and alter history, because it all worked out quite well. But I would definitely say be a bit braver. I think as a 16-year-old, if we're going that far back, I was a shy, introverted 16-year-old, and I didn't really believe in myself, and I didn't think I could do it. And I think it took me decades to sort of sit down and write that first novel. So I'd probably give myself a kick up the arse and say, go and get a move on. Don't fanny around for 20 years. Be a bit braver. You can do it. Start doing it. Don't give up. Just sit down and do it. So be braver, I would say.
I think that's a wonderful way to end the podcast, if I may. Luke, it's been fabulous to talk to you. I do hope we get to invite you back when that option turns into a TV show for the first and second book. And I truly do hope that we can entice you down to Eastbourne.
I'd love to
come.
It
is slightly off season, but I promise you it won't be quite so desperate.
I'll check out them all.
Yeah, I shall personally take you to the Hampden Park Mall. I don't think it's what you imagined.
Thank you, Rod. It was great fun.
Thank you, everybody, for listening to the Eastbourne Literary Festival's podcast. We'll be trying to put out an episode like this relatively regularly as we get used to doing it. Thanks for hanging in there with us. If you'd like to be involved in the festival or in any way would like to show your support for it, please visit eastbourneliteraryfestival.com. The links will be going out with the podcast episode. Me and the team are always looking for new folks to get involved as we bring this hopefully incredible festival to life.